From Nashville Public Radio, I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. We're taking your calls today as our panel helps us think through the headlines that intersect with faith. ICE raids in churches, Christians in execution, evangelicals and Nazis, our founding fathers and faith. Here with us are Vanderbilt's Phillis Sheppard, Russell Moore of Christianity Today, and Liam Adams of the Tennessean. It's a religious roundabout after the news. This is Nashville.
Sharing news and stories from the voices of Middle Tennessee. This is Nashville. Our show is made possible by Music City Prep Clinic. This is Nashville is in service to you. So if you have an idea for the show or feedback you'd like us to hear, leave us a voice message at 615-751-2500.
The news is first.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Pentagon watchdog finds Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth violated Pentagon policies when he discussed sensitive operational details on a Signal group chat. The investigation was launched at the request of the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee after The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg reported that he was included in a chat about upcoming military strikes in Yemen.
There were two problems with the chat. One, that it was happening in a commercial messaging app. And the second was that they didn't know who they had added into the chat, namely me, and violating basic rules of good digital hygiene.
Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg speaking with NPR's Morning Edition. We should note NPR CEO Catherine Marr chairs the board of the Signal Foundation. Hegseth is also under heavy scrutiny over military strikes on boats suspected of carrying drugs from South America to the U.S. Some military lawyers and political leaders have raised concerns that a war crime might have been committed in one such encounter on September 2nd. The Washington Post first reported that Secretary Hegseth gave a spoken order to kill everybody on the boat, and according to unnamed sources, when two survivors were detected, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley directed another strike to comply with Hegseth's order that no one be left alive. Lawmakers were expected to hold closed-door briefings today with Bradley. The FBI says it has arrested a man suspected of placing pipe bombs near the U.S. Capitol complex ahead of the insurrection at the Capitol nearly 5 years ago, according to three sources familiar with the matter. Here's NPR's Carrie Johnson.
The FBI has spent years searching for the person who put bombs near the Democratic and Republican committee headquarters hours before the assault on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Now a federal law enforcement source says authorities think they have identified the culprit. FBI agents conducted 1,000 interviews and reviewed nearly 40,000 video files. But the alleged bomber remained elusive for years, despite a $500,000 reward. New leaders at the FBI and the Justice Department intensified their focus on the case this year. Carrie Johnson, NPR News.
New York Attorney General Letitia James is challenging the legality of Trump loyalist John Sarkozy's appointment as acting U.S. Attorney for Northern New York. A court hearing is scheduled today. James is disputing his authority to oversee a Justice Department investigation into regulatory lawsuits she filed against President Trump and the National Rifle Association. U.S. stocks are mixed this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 71 points at 47,811. The S&P has gained 3 points, and the Nasdaq is up 36 points. From Washington, this is NPR News. Investors are getting mixed signals today about the U.S. job market. NPR's Scott Horsley reports on conflicting signs. Layoffs are either up or possibly down.
A consulting firm that tracks layoff notices says U.S. employers announced more than 71,000 job cuts last month. That's fewer potential pink slips than announced in October, but more than this time last year. That's according to a tally compiled by the outplacement firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas. New applications for unemployment benefits, which are often seen as a proxy for layoffs, fell last week. The Thanksgiving holiday may have affected those numbers. As of mid-November, some 1.8 million people were receiving some form of jobless assistance. Asian stocks were mixed overnight, up in Tokyo and Hong Kong, but down in Shanghai and Seoul. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
The color company Pantone has announced its annual color of the year, and it's Cloud Dancer. It's the first shade of white Pantone has chosen since it started this tradition in 1999. Here's NPR's Andrew Limbong.
It's a slightly muted shade of white with a few hints of gray and brown in there. In the video making the announcement, Pantone Executive Director Leatrice Eisman says the color is imbued with a feeling of serenity.
At this time, we're reimagining our future and our place in the world. Cloud Dancer is a discreet white hue offering a promise of clarity.
These pics are supposed to be zeitgeisty, tapping into the feelings and needs of the culture at large. In this case, the white is meant to respond to our ever frantic and frazzled lives. Keep your eyes peeled for the color showing up in everything from couches to Post-its to Play-Doh in 2026.
It's NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for use in restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Gwen, committed to making tougher, quieter, cleaner HVACs with self-cleaning and variable voltage. Built to work almost anywhere. Backed by 12-year parts with 7-year labor and refrigerant warranty, no matter who installs it. More at gwinhvac.com.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. This is when we take a moment to think about the big stories of the week with the help of our thoughtful panel, and we take your calls. This week, we are focused on the religious angles, primarily Christian, that run through so many of the issues that are front and center for us. And we'll start the hour with a moment on the outcome of the special election in the 7th Congressional District. We'll also talk about Christians and the death penalty, with an execution scheduled to take place here next week. Our panel is an all-star lineup. Vanderbilt professor Phillis Sheppard, who teaches religion, psychology, and culture. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having.
And welcome back to This is Nashville. Russell Moore, editor-at-large of Christianity Today, formerly the public policy chief for the Southern Baptist Convention. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
And Liam Adams, religion reporter for the Tennessean, whose work is read around the country through the USA Today network. Welcome.
Great to be back. Thank you.
And you can join the conversation this hour by phone at 615-760-2000. I'll say that number many times. We're also streaming video at youtube.com/@WPLN. Very easy to just drop a comment or a question in the chat there, and we'll try to work it into the conversation. So starting with the 7th Congressional District special election, which Matt Van Epps won fairly easily, though it was a tighter race than the last election held in this very Republican district. And Republicans got a lot of mileage out of a podcast appearance by the Democrat, Afton Bain, who is a state representative from Nashville. Let's take a listen to what she said on the Red State Blue Mom podcast back in June of 24.
I have a hard time when religion is at the core of everything we do in the legislature. And so, for example, on the House floor, we say a prayer every session. Some committees open up with prayer. We also stand for the pledge. And there are also prayer groups in the legislature that meet routinely. There are Christian pastors that have a lot of say and proximity to power in the legislature and dictate a lot of what the power players do. And it is uncomfortable. And I think it makes a lot of my constituents who represent a diversity of religion deeply uncomfortable and unsettled.
And based on what she said, President Trump ended up writing in a Truth Social post shortly before the election that Matt Van Epps is fighting against a woman who hates Christianity. It's on tape, all caps. Phillis Sheppard, do you still have to embrace Christianity to win a political race in Tennessee, at least, outside of the Nashville metro area?
I think that's a great question. I think the question should remind us that Tennessee is in what's called the Bible Belt. So I don't know if it's a matter of embracing it, but it's a matter of recognizing the context, but also complicating the context that we're also in a very religiously diverse community. I think there are a variety of ways in which, as she said, many of her constituents are happy that she brought up the point that not everyone, even sitting in our legislative bodies, is Christian. But how to navigate that when you're in a place that takes pride on being in the Bible Belt, I think is the path forward. And I actually think she did something very brave by raising it to the level of discourse. Like, how do we live together in a religiously plural environment that is still predominantly Christian?
To listeners, do you feel like voters in Tennessee still need to see a candidate, in church on Sunday morning? Or is there room in races outside of Nashville even for someone like Afton Bain who says she's more secular? You can join us on air, 615-760-2000. Russell Moore, Afton Bain is, she's right that the proceedings of the state legislature are quite Christian. Is there danger in having this sort of unspoken requirement in Tennessee politics that you need to at least kind of go through some of the motions of Christianity?
Well, I'm not sure that there's anything unique to Tennessee about having some sort of religious foundation expected from elected officials. And I am, of course, very uncomfortable with using religion for political means. But that said, the statement that she made, I can't imagine what she was thinking. I mean, especially for somebody who's aspiring to bigger office than what she was holding at the time, not because she's suggesting that there are more than just Christians in the legislature. That's obviously true. But because it communicates a kind of contempt, I think, in the way that she worded it. And we all have said stupid things, and maybe that was the case that she probably would reword it differently. But I don't think that was an effective strategy to take.
Yeah.
It really wouldn't be in almost anywhere, even places outside the Bible Belt. I think it's one thing to say we need more religious pluralism in our legislature, if that's what she wanted to convey. Another thing to say, it's too Christian.
Yeah.
It's just not wise.
I imagine she was just being candid, though.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Liam, Tennessee, I had to look this up this morning and realized I had done a story about this, still has a ban on atheists serving in the state legislature, though apparently the law is superseded by a Supreme Court decision way back. But as fewer and fewer people are going to church on Sundays, even in the Bible Belt, have we seen that kind of standard of what folks expect of elected officials change too?
Well, it's an interesting, I'm going to complicate your question because I think there's a larger national conversation happening around faith being an asset for progressive candidates. A good example of this is Democratic U.S. Senate candidate out in Texas, James Tallarico, who is a Presbyterian seminarian, progressive. And he's trying to push this narrative around we can be committed people of faith and also progressive candidates. I think that was also part of the conversation around Zoran Mondani's candidacy for New York mayor, a very different political context. But I think there's been this notion that, progressives are less faith-centric and conservatives are the more biblical, Bible-believing folks. And I think you're seeing some of that be turned on its head.
Yeah,
right
Russell,
now.
are you seeing that?
Well, I mean, if you just look historically at the Democratic candidates who have won the presidency, Jimmy Carter, obviously, Bill Clinton, I don't think anybody would confuse for a very religious person, but he did use religious language, was in the choir at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Little Rock. And, of course, Barack Obama, who would sing Amazing Grace. I mean, he very much knew how to convey that. So I don't think that a completely secular sort of approach has worked very well.
Yeah. Well, let's take it to the phones, which are kind of lighting up on this issue. So, Mark, why don't you get us started? Mark in Franklin, you're on This is Nashville. Get us going.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think my comment is around that the Christianity becomes a litmus test for the way that you might legislate. I think that conservatives here in Middle Tennessee want to vote conservative just to hold on to their money, but it certainly doesn't feel like it shows up in the way that they legislate. If you look at what they should use government as an arm to help people, but oftentimes I feel like the bills that are passed turn out to be exactly the opposite from those that claim to be these strong Christians.
Russell Moore, you want to respond to that?
Well, I think that obviously any time that a legislature is taking action, it's doing so from some moral framework. And I think it's perfectly legitimate for people to communicate where their conscience is being shaped and being formed. And so I do think that there are a lot of people who, as this caller notices, see inconsistencies, see people who are appealing to the Bible in areas which fits what they would do anyway, and then minimizing it when it's not. I do think that's an issue all around the country.
Yeah, and I think we'll go take one more call. Mac from Nashville, kind of on this in the same point. Go ahead. You're on This is Nashville.
Yes, I'm having a hard time reconciling how the evangelical right has so embraced Donald Trump when he is arguably the least Christian president we've ever had, and actually hostile to the whole idea of do unto others.
Well, yeah, Russell, I hate to put that another one in your lap over here, but you kind of have some personal experience here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I've been saying that for 10 years. I do think that the effect, what I was worried about in 2015, 2016, is what the embrace of this person would do to evangelicals themselves. And I think we've seen the results of that, and they've not been good in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I do think that not every evangelical Christian, though, is on board with the character of this person. But it has been, we've been living through it for a decade, and it shows up in churches, Sunday school classes, everywhere else.
Phillis Sheppard, do you care to weigh in here on just, I'm thinking that all of a sudden we've assumed, I think there's some people who assume that Christianity has gotten in line behind Trump. I assume that's not nearly the case, but what have you seen?
Well, I think part of the issue is that when we say Christianity, we think we know what we're saying, as opposed to it being a very broad category, which leads us to say things like Donald Trump is a Christian and this is why, without actually comparing the effect of Donald Trump, as you say, on evangelicals with what we think Christianity is. So to that I would say that this is where I think churches hold some responsibility. The theological reflection that happens from the pulpit and in the congregation needs to ask us to think about what we mean when we use the word Christianity today, and not just what it means for us individually, but what it also means for the broader community. If the outcome is negative, then we have to ask, is this what we mean by Christianity?
I see. Let's take one more call on this point, and then we may move on. Tan from, help me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but you're on This is Nashville.
Thanks so much. Yes, you're pronouncing my name correctly. I was blessed to be able to take a class with Professor Sheppard, and I know, the work of all three of your guests, so they're all leaders. And the question I have, maybe it's sort of already been asked differently, but for those of us who are people of faith, who are Christians, who are deeply, deeply distraught about the way our religion has been used and abused in service of power, I want to ask, if you had like 50,000 people like me, who care deeply about our faith and are so distraught in this moment, and you had a way to have us take action to push back against the rise of Christian nationalism, to try to restore our faith, predominantly to be a faith of love, what would you ask us to do? How could we be of service in this moment?
Phillis Sheppard, do you want to start? She's your student, your pupil.
I hope this is what I said in class. But I think the first thing is to show up. I think, and by showing up, I mean, obviously the way we vote, but also communicating with legislators and with our faith communities where we stand on the issues. I think it's very easy at times to wring our hands and not put our feet where we want the direction to go, but to be clear about the ways in which what's happening is totally antithetical to our faith commitments. And by our faith commitments, obviously things that come to mind is, what does it mean to love the community? What does it mean to honor God? And what does it mean to be transformed as a community, not just an individual? So showing up in those kinds of conversations, but those kinds of actions, which I think involve risk. I think about my work at the James Lawson Institute for the Research and Study of Nonviolent Movements, which involve not just learning about nonviolent tactics that are the obvious ones, protesting, but learning about tactics that disrupt what is important in our communities. For instance, finances, putting our money or withholding it from where our commitments lie. Those, and consistently, which I think is very hard to. You think about. This is the last thing I'll say. You think about the bus boycotts from the 60s. Those were not a month-long action, year-long of being inconvenienced by living out our commitments. A lot of times we're not inconvenienced, we're upset, we're disturbed, but we're not inconvenienced.
Russell Moore, what if you had these 50,000 strong wanting to fight Christian nationalism?
I would say don't get cynical. Part of the problem is the issues seem too big. And so I often say to people, you can't fix the country or the church, broadly speaking, by yourself. But what you can do is to not yield to cynicism, demoralization, giving up. And I think the cynicism can work in multiple ways. For some people, it's well, I can't do anything about this, so I'm just going to retreat. For other people, it's, well, apparently this is the way the game is played now, I'm going to play it. Don't yield to that.
We have one more call on this topic, and William in Clarksville, we may have already kind of answered your question, but would you want to add anything to the points being made here?
Absolutely. Thank you for taking my call. For those that make the claim of Christianity, it seems like they're not even following the examples of Christianity from the Bible. They are using it for themselves and for their own agendas. They have to remember that in the Bible makes a clear statement from Jesus himself, who said, many will say, Lord, 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 and he will say, I never knew you. So the claim of Christianity and the life of Christianity seem to be in conflict with a lot of individuals here in America. Thank you.
Thanks for the call, William. Russell Moore, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I would say that's one of the reasons why I'm so worried about Christianity being used as a means to an end, regardless of what the end is, because I believe this. I believe this is true and is an end in and of itself. So, I mean, the caller, I don't know what all the caller has seen, but it is true that often people get a reflection from public expressions of Christianity and think, well, that must be what Jesus is like.
Well, we do need to take our first break. This is an episode dedicated to the religious undertones that run through so many stories and big issues in Middle Tennessee. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about churches and ICE raids, about capital punishment. If you got something to say, you can join us on air at any time, 615-760-2000. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This is Nashville. Engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com. And Renewal House, providing care, connection, and recovery programs for women and their children. Learn more at renewalhouse.org. And Vanderbilt's Master of Liberal Arts and Science program, offering a variety of interdisciplinary evening courses with flexible scheduling for working professionals and lifelong learners. Open house January 6th. Details at vanderbilt.edu/MLAS.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Next time on The Middle, the stock market may be near record levels, but unemployment is ticking up, interest rates remain high, and President Trump's tariffs have made consumer goods more expensive. Add to that the recently ended government shutdown and uncertainty about healthcare. We want to know about the state of your economy. That's next time on The Middle.
Tonight at 8 on 90.3 WPLN News.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. It's our Roundabout edition where we take a moment to think about the news of this moment in Middle Tennessee. And today we've got religion, particularly Southern Christianity, front and center for us. Our panel includes religion reporter Liam Adams of the Tennessean, Vanderbilt religion professor Phillis Sheppard, and Russell Moore of Christianity Today. Let's take a moment. We're going to look at what's coming up here in terms of an execution. Next week, Harold Wayne Nichols is scheduled to be executed for the rape and murder of 21-year-old Karen Pulley nearly 40 years ago. If the execution goes through as planned, it will be Tennessee's third this year. Anti-death penalty activist Shane Claiborne says that over 85% of executions happen in the Bible Belt, in southern states like Tennessee, led by Christian governors and Christian legislators.
So the Bible Belt is the death belt in our country. And this is also very troubling. Is not only is it connected to our history around racism and racial equality, but it's also the states where Christians are most concentrated that the death penalty has survived. And literally, the death penalty would not stand a chance in America if it weren't for the support of Christians.
Liam Adams, Governor Bill Lee, is not shy about his Christian faith, but have we heard him talk much about his beliefs in relationship to the death penalty?
No, that hasn't been as much of a conversation, I would say, among conservative Christians in terms of talking critically about the death penalty. I will say that there's this long tradition of progressive faith groups and clergy here in the Nashville area that have organized around the death penalty. There were a sort of more organized groups prior to the moratorium. Now it's a more sort of loosely aligned kind of group of clergy from mainline denominations. Some might even consider themselves evangelical, that are protesting at each of the executions that have happened this year. So we're expecting some events with this upcoming execution with sort of faith voices protesting actually outside the site of where it happens.
And in fact, we've got a beautiful episode queued up for you next week on Tuesday, dedicated entirely to the death penalty, and it's not to be missed. A death row chaplain and opponent who's often outside of Riverbend Maximum Security Prison sits down face-to-face with an activist who is on the pro-death penalty side of the fence on those execution days. So stay tuned for that on Tuesday. For listeners, how do you square the death penalty with the nonviolence demonstrated by Jesus taught in Christianity? Join us on air at 615-760-2000, or you can leave a comment in the video stream chat at youtube.com/@WPLN. Phillis Sheppard, is it primarily liberal Christians who speak out against the death penalty, or is there kind of a broader coalition of religious faith leaders that oppose capital punishment?
I think a lot of our attention has been on what we would call liberal Christians, and it's not totally inaccurate, but I think there are also conservative bodies whose theological and moral convictions lead them to say that the death penalty disrupts the potential for justice, but also disrupts the potential for transformation, not just for those who are the victims of violent crimes, meaning, for instance, this woman whose sister was killed, but also for whole communities. We have to look at the way in which the death penalty is employed, if you will. We can't avoid looking at its racial history, who's most likely to be sentenced to death and live on death row. So in many ways, it reveals some of the larger problems that we already are talking about in our broader society.
Russell Moore, is Shane Claiborne right that the death penalty would not stand a chance in America if it weren't for the support of Christians?
Well, yes, but I would say part of the problem is the way that anti-death penalty folks make the argument, which is if the argument is the death penalty is wrong, full stop, because it's the taking of human life, most Christians do have a category of legitimate state action. Most Christians are not across the board pacifists when it comes to war or to the power of the state with capital punishment. Where the argument becomes more compelling, and I've spent an hour with Shane Claiborne talking about these issues, the sort of pacifist arguments did nothing for me. But when we start talking about, does the death penalty in America right now actually work? Does it actually achieve justice? That's an entirely different conversation. And some of the racial disparity, the class disparity questions, the inconsistency with which it's being applied, those are very real questions that I think if they were being debated more, might have a different result.
Happy to pick up this topic again if we've got callers who want to talk on it. The number's 615-760-2000. But we're going to move on to the prospect of immigration raids in houses of worship. Liam, as of yet, we have not seen immigration raids occur in like churches or mosques. But why is it that people are concerned that this could happen? Because, I mean, you were reporting about this in February. I don't think it's happened since then. Is it just talk?
Yeah, well, there's been a whole legal case around this Department of Homeland Security policy guidance for quote-unquote sensitive locations. So that includes churches and schools and whether ICE can conduct sort of operations in those spaces. So when I was reporting on it earlier this year, we had some, for example, NOAA and Turk. These are local groups that were educating clergy on know your rights and spelling out very specifically what happens when ICE shows up at the door. Now, we haven't seen raids in churches. I think that is still an unlikely possibility. We have seen reports of ICE waiting outside churches to detain certain individuals, but not on a sort of larger scale. So I think that's kind of the landscape right now. There are other, and I'm happy to talk a little more about this, but other state legislation that's causing sort of deeper concern for congregations in the area. But
and this is what about essentially it could be illegal. You could be accused of harboring.
Yeah. So Tennessee had passed a law this session that had criminalized churches and charities from quote unquote harboring undocumented people, which includes providing shelter for them in exchange for financial benefit. This is being challenged in court, and some of the more recent news to come from this court case is Tennessee's Attorney General said he will not pledge not to prosecute churches that provide shelter for undocumented people. So it's creating this sort of widespread fear and anxiety among congregations that are serving predominantly sort of undocumented, sort of parishioners.
Russell Moore, do you sense that churches are taking that seriously?
I have not seen many churches actively worried about this for precisely the reasons that Liam's talking about. We haven't seen widespread ICE raids of churches. Where I have seen this show up is in a kind of chilling effect of people who are afraid to go to church if they have an undocumented, sometimes relative, mom or dad, and who essentially are at home and fearful of coming out. I think that is right now a bigger concern for most congregations.
Let's go quickly to the phones. Ellie in Nashville, I think you've got a question for Russell Moore. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Moore. I was just interested about your perspective on the death penalty. It sounds like you're essentially making an argument about effectiveness and whether it actually impacts behavior. I'm curious what you think about like the cruel and unusual aspect of it from kind of the Christian perspective. In Tennessee, we use a 3-drug protocol, and it's very painful. And actually, apparently, they duct tape people's fingers down so they can't see them suffering. And yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, that clearly is what I'm talking about. One of the more compelling arguments to give to people who don't really see and don't really know what's going on death row. So yes, by saying effectiveness, I mean not just is it a deterrent, but does it actually enact justice? And that's the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ellie. And others who want to call in on whether it's capital punishment or on on the prospect of ICE raids in houses of worship. The number is 615-760-2000. But we may step forward to yet another topic. Why not? We'll cover as much ground as we can today. Ken Burns' documentary about the Revolutionary War came out just in the last couple weeks. And the case is made that the founders created a system which intentionally prevents the government from establishing a state religion. Russell Moore, you interviewed Ken Burns on your podcast and pointed out that there is an entire industry that goes around to churches and other places to say our founders were evangelical Christians. Here's how Burns responds.
It's just not true, and it's so much more interesting. It doesn't mean that they're not men of faith or that the people aren't driven by deeply held spiritual concerns. As you know, many of the founders sort of gravitated, without necessarily throwing off their original, mostly Protestant denominations, into something which we call deism. Jefferson is the most prominent, but Washington's susceptible to its charms, as is Franklin and many of the other people. It says that there is a God, but one disinterested in the day-to-day affairs of men.
And that's, again, Ken Burns on Russell Moore's podcast. Is he right, this sort of relooking that the Founding Fathers, not so Christian as people have been taught?
Well, one of the problems with the argument the Founding Fathers were evangelical Christians is that people can actually go back and read the primary documents and then start to say, well, if Thomas Jefferson, who's literally cutting the words of Jesus out of the Bible, is an evangelical Christian, then who's not? And so that is not a serious argument. But what we did have in the founding era was an alliance between some people who were deeply rooted in Orthodox Christian faith, some people who were not, but who believed in common in religious freedom for everybody. I mean, my Baptist ancestors would never have allowed Thomas Jefferson to teach Sunday school, but they wanted to be in alliance with him to make sure that we did not have a government that is, for instance, issuing licenses to preach or not to preach and restricting people on the basis of their religious faith.
Well, have you made it through, listeners, to through the 6th episode series of Ken Burns? Did it raise new questions for you about things you've assumed about this being a Christian nation? Join us at 615-760-2000. Phillis Sheppard, the other debate here is whether or not to point out the hypocrisy of a founding nation with the words that all men are created equal, while most of the signers owned slaves. It's this theme throughout the Burns documentary. But how did Christian leaders justify slavery during this time?
Well, it's very interesting for those who justified it from a biblical perspective. What is his name? Mark Knoll, the Wheaton professor who did the work to show that those who used a biblical perspective for slavery used the same scriptures that those who were arguing against slavery to argue their positions. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. Enslavement was about economic gain. It was about building the country on the backs of stolen peoples. It primarily was not a religious endeavor, even though there were certainly denominations, religious people who thought that they were doing missionary work, and we hear some of that language in a little more nuance, possibly, that suggests that there was something good about slavery. It was about making money and building economic wealth for the country, for the growing country, but also for individuals.
Liam, how often do you see political leaders in Tennessee kind of talking about this as a nation with kind of Christian principles and founding ideals?
Yeah, it's extremely prominent at this point. And this actually there was a question earlier when we were talking about the elections and Christian nationalism that made me think about this. Right, this is a conversation that's very common, but it's also complicated. And what I mean by that is this summer I was at the a conservative Presbyterian national conference where they had created a study committee to study Christian nationalism. And the moderator of this Presbyterian denomination has put out sort of writings that is critical of Christian nationalism and is expected to appoint members that might be more critical of it. And yet you have people in this denomination which are much more sort of supportive of Christian nationalism. And so this is a conservative evangelical Presbyterian denomination that might be coming out with a pretty critical report of Christian nationalism, and kind of as a rebuke to another camp of Presbyterians that are aligned actually with the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He's part of this far right-wing denomination associated with this controversial pastor named Doug Wilson, who's been known for supporting Christian nationalist ideas. And so you have in these, even in conservative evangelical denominations, a divide about how we define Christian nationalism, how supportive of we are of it. And so I think it's just, there's this idea that this is just all of evangelicalism. And in fact, evangelicals are pretty divided over exactly how do we talk about this.
Let's work on one more call before we get to a break. Diane in Nashville, you're on This is Nashville. Where do you want to go?
I don't know if this is your lucky day or not, but I happen to have a degree in religious education and a master's in criminal justice. And so I have a lot of thoughts.
Well, why don't you give us one?
Okay. Criminal justice and religion are two entirely different things. One is a system of exactly what it says, justice, and the other one is a faith-based life. And in the United States, we have many religions, not just Christian. And before decisions are made about combining criminal justice and religion, you need to consider the extremes of all the religions that are here. And I'm not sure that people think about that.
Phillis Sheppard, can you help us sort out how that might make us think in a new way about criminal justice?
I think it's actually trying to address the question after the horse has been let out of the barn, if I can use that phrase. And what I mean is that religion, criminal justice, those have been merged in conversation, in rhetoric, since our early days. But I would say especially post-Civil War, when the criminal justice system, the prison system was emerging, particularly in the South, as alongside Jim Crow laws, as a way, I think some would argue, and I would agree, as a way to reinforce the social, legal, and relational dynamics of enslavement. When laws such as if you were previously enslaved and you were found to be loitering, you're no longer working on a plantation, then you could be thrown into jail. So the tie and all that was connected to religious language of being lazy, not, idle hands, all of that connected together to come up with what now is our criminal justice system and our prison system. And it's still operative.
Well, Diane, we appreciate the call. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we'll get a warning from Russell Moore about evangelicals and Nazis. We'll get to Bruce on the phone, so stay with us. And Liam, we may have time for him to take us on a trip to Africa and tie us back to the Methodist Church here in Nashville. So stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, working to help donors make more possible through the power of community giving. More at cfmt.org. And Optum. Optum delivers prescriptions, administers in-home infusion therapy, and provides specialty pharmacy care for patients across Tennessee. For more information, visit optum.com/stories. And Pastaria, a celebration of Italy in Nashville, in the One City development, serving dinner daily. Additional menu information about the 4 to 6 p.m. offerings and Meatball Mondays online at eatpastaria.com.
Big changes are coming to Middle Tennessee. A special election is underway to determine who represents our region in Congress. And Elon Musk's company has begun work on a tunnel running under Nashville without much input from the city.
Why shouldn't we have an input
on what happens in our city.
I'm Mariana Baca-Yao, and as a WPLN reporter, I'm tackling those stories and more, shining a light on how decisions at the State House affect your everyday life.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. We are wrapping up our Roundabout panel on religious stories of this moment. Liam Adams of the Tennessean, Vanderbilt professor Phillis Sheppard, and Russell Moore of Christianity Today, formerly leader in the Southern Baptist Convention. We may just go straight to the phones, too. Bruce, you've been waiting so patiently there, ready to bring us back to our death penalty conversation. Go ahead, and you may need to turn down your radio there.
Okay, is my sound good?
Sound good. Go on.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, hi. First of all, hello to my colleague, Phillis, faculty colleague at Vanderbilt. I simply wanted to add to the conversation about the opposition to the death penalty that the three Catholic bishops of Tennessee a couple weeks ago issued a joint letter arguing and explaining the unacceptability not only by Christian faith, but by what we would call natural law and the common good, for why the death penalty is simply an unacceptable action on the part of the state and the people. And then the Episcopal dioceses across Tennessee, those three bishops also issued a similar letter not long after that. So I contribute that just to add a response to a question that you had about whether it's only so-called left-wing Christians or Catholics or whoever that are concerned about this. It's also the leadership. I can't speak to whether and to what extent the work of those Catholic bishops is being propagated in the parishes. Myself, my ministry is in prisons, for prisons, so I don't know. But I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I'll just jump to that and say, like, I echo you, Bruce. Thank you for pointing that out. I've been aware of those statements by the Episcopal and Catholic bishops. And I think it's a testament to, right, the Catholic bishops have been a voice on both conservative sort of stances as well as more moderate stances. And the fact that they came together and spoke so strongly about this, I think just speaks to the sort of bipartisan sort of sentiments among the faith community in opposition to the death penalty.
Bruce, we really appreciate your phone call. And if you'd like to join him, there's still time, but you probably need to call soon. We can't work you in right at the end of the hour. So the number is 615-760-2000. And thanks for being so loud and proud today. Russell Moore, let's go to this. You wrote recently kind of an open warning to evangelicals being too quiet on, I guess you'd call it Nazi sympathizing. Maybe you'd use a different word. But what have you been seeing that concerns you?
Well, I've not been seeing Nazi sympathy in church in any widespread way. But what we have seen is the normalization of Nick Fuentes and other Nazi sympathizing voices.
For folks who don't know who that is, because I only learned when I realized there was this flare-up with Tucker Carlson interviewing him. Didn't know why it was such a big deal. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, this is it's hard to even categorize how extreme this person is in terms of praising Adolf Hitler, in terms of denying the Holocaust, all kinds of other issues, platformed by Tucker Carlson. That then has had reverberating effects as people are asking, well, how big is this coalition? And my warning to Christians is to say, I think there are a lot of people who are not taking this seriously because they say, well, it's not that many people, when they don't understand how ideas work and the way the Overton window is being pushed dramatically beyond what we would have ever thought. If I had said 10 years ago that we would be having a conversation about whether Tucker Carlson should have Holocaust deniers on his show, people would have said, well, that will never happen. And here we are.
Phillis Sheppard, you're nodding. What are you thinking?
I think you're absolutely right. I also think that, yes, 10 years ago, it would have been nearly impossible, certainly subdued. But we're finding that symbols of Nazism, the ideas are spreading across all elements of our public language, our public discourse, finding signs in political offices and people trying to explain it away. This is not a new problem. This is an old problem where much of what's happening right now pulls the veil off. And I think this supports your position in that now is not the time to be mortified, shocked, but really now is the time for action, because we see that there's a pattern to the kinds of anti-Semitism that goes along with this. It's rising to become embodied, I would say. So
you and I think another one of your points, Russell, was about how I think there's a thought, and maybe it's generational, that like, well, this is kind of happening online, and that's not even real life. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've seen Phil Williams' story with this. Have you seen it? Yeah, this guy who is very frightening, who is like just having kids come on, and basically, talking up Nazism or something. So can you kind of help people understand why just because it's online doesn't mean it's not a threat?
Well, people who say, well, this is just online are living in 2005. They're not living in 2025. 2025 is online. Online life shapes and forms every aspect of our lives right now. And so I think there was a time when you could say, well, these are just some trolls on the internet. Let's pay no attention to them. That does not understand the media ecosystem that we have now.
Yeah. If you'd like to, have you, listener, seen Christian leaders calling out, references to Nazism or otherwise? Are you part of a Jewish community that's seen intimidation locally? What would you like to see Christian leaders do? Join us on air at 615-760-2000. Liam, have we seen many religious leaders join Russell Moore locally and kind of calling out fringe groups, whether they're fringe or not?
Yeah, I would definitely say that is, even in conservative evangelical denominations, people calling out these kinds of voices. I'll add to the anti-Semitism is a piece of it, and Nazi sympathizing. But in some of these more extreme sort of camps, it's not just there are other issues that are, I think, just as motivating to that base, to that audience. And so you've seen, you referenced Phil's reporting. It's in these circles where there's also a lot of conversation about women's submission and really extreme forms of that. That has been another big issue. In some of these voices, you referenced this podcaster and pastor named Joel Webbin. He's also come under fire for, statements that basically are reviving theology that was used in defense of slavery. It's called the Curse of Ham. And so it's not just the Nazi sympathizing and the anti-Semitism. There are other issues that I think has received even greater appeal among their audience, and maybe even kind of normalized, some of their ideas with a wider audience.
Well, complicated, a lot there, a little bit of everything, kind of all mixed in there that makes us shake our heads here in the studio. Let's spend our last few minutes. We may take one more call on this, but Liam, in the meantime, your beat took you to Zimbabwe, not something that a lot of religion reporters in Nashville are doing. But why did the splintering of the United Methodists, who are based here in Nashville, get you to report on churches in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, I got back from Zimbabwe. My colleague, Andrew Nellis, and I, he's a photojournalist, we went out there for a week and a half to report on the United Methodist Church in Africa at this pivotal moment of change. The United Methodist Church, which is historically based in Nashville, it's been undergoing a splintering largely fueled by debates over LGBTQ rights, where churches have left the UMC and gone to a more conservative breakaway denomination. And that conflict had been happening in the U.S. for the past few years, and we covered it very regularly. And then this year, that conflict has really been escalating in Africa. So we had been pitching the Pulitzer Center, and through a partnership with them, we're able to go out to Zimbabwe right before the denomination approved this restructuring, which gives more independence to regions outside the United States.
So this is this primarily over the issue of Methodists, United Methodists, being embracing LGBTQ members and leaders?
That's part of it. So with this restructuring, it allows the United Methodist leadership in these African nations to maintain more traditionalist policies, which are aligned with local customs and laws, such as in Zimbabwe, same-sex relationships. There's criminal laws against that.
In other words, it lets them be more conservative.
It lets them be more conservative. But when we went out there, we understood the depth of this restructuring at much greater. And so our biggest story, we did a lot of different stories coming out of Zimbabwe, but our biggest story was about this history of the United Methodist Church in Zimbabwe led and being sort of created for Black Africans. There's this really interesting history of United Methodists being involved in the liberation of the country from apartheid rule. And then since then, the Zimbabwe bishops have been building these institutions that we got to witness out there, from schools to hospitals to a ward for expecting mothers. All of these are serving Black Africans and reversing some of the policies that were there under the apartheid state, and their cultural customs being part of the religious services. And so it's not just about this particular debate. It's about what does it mean to be an independent African church. And we got to witness that in ways that we didn't expect.
Phillis Sheppard, are we seeing that in other ways, that denominations, maybe becoming a little less American?
I like the way you put that, a little less American, maybe a little less American controlled. But it becomes quite complicated because, as Liam pointed out, there are ministries and works emerging that could not emerge before, but there are also theologies and cultural norms that reject people, LGBTQI folks, identified folks. And how do those fit together? In particular, how does the theology of the church say that these lives are worth creating ministries for, and these should be criminalized? Obviously, there's a long history there, but that makes it very hard to be a unified church. Sooner or later, they'll be wrestling with these together.
Well, Russell Moore, what does this say about the future of unified denominations, even just within a country like the Southern Baptist where you've come from?
Well, every denomination, right? I can't think of a denomination that is not under some sort of stress and division. In some ways, it worries me because it reminds me of the 1850s when we had the splitting of the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Baptist churches. That was foreboding of something else to come. On the good side...
Yeah, don't leave us there.
On the good side, I think we do see a church that is much less American, and I think the future of the church right now is in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and we're along for the ride.
Well, Russell Moore of Christianity Today, Phillis Sheppard of Vanderbilt, Liam Adams of the Tennessean, thank you so much for joining our first Religious Roundabout. Thank you for tuning in this hour and joining us on the phones. This is Nashville's a production of Nashville Public Radio. If you missed yesterday's episode, it was an installment of Music Citizens. We met a tastemaker named Kim Bowie and learned the highs and lots of lows of the evolving A&R business. Listen in our podcast feed or at thisisnashville.org. Today's episode produced by Mary Mancini, directed by Tasha A.F. Limley, Josh Deepin working hard on the phones today, and our board operators, Liv Lombardi. Masterminds behind that theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. The conversation doesn't have to end. You can comment, tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message anywhere you can find us, but there's an easy one by calling 615-751-2500 or find us on the socials at This Is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.
Davidson County Clerk's Office with a reminder that most vehicle registrations and renewals can be done online, by mail, or at one of their area kiosk locations, including Green Hills, Plaza Mariachi, Southeast Branch Library, Bellevue Library, Donaldson Library, Bordeaux Library, Farmers Market, East Branch Library, South Police Precinct, Madison, and the newest 24/7 location outside the Hermitage Police Precinct. More at countyclerk.nashville.gov.
This is 90.3 WPLN.
Nashville Public Radio.
And 91.7 WHRS Cookeville.
Nashville's home for Morning Edition and NPR News.
WPLN.org is where you can find more from WPLN News, including the Nash Villager, your human-powered newsletter and podcast, exploring Nashville news and history. Subscribe to both at WPLN.org.